talking sports business. We were talking about our $1 million ideas. Speaking of sports business, I'm glad we got Nicole on because you've talked about this on Power Hour quite a bit, but new Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti, what is his mandate? When he gets hired by the schools, when they bring him in, what do they say we want you to do over these first few years in office?
It's a good question because so many of these jobs, when they've turned over, it's been a very obvious number one priority, and it was a media rights deal, right? Like that's what Kevin Warren walked into. The Big Ten's deal was expiring. They needed a new one. The Pac-12, we are many months into this, but that is the main job for George Kliavkoff. And Brett Yormark got his extension done. So typically we've seen these changes like before a media deal needs to be negotiated because it's the person who's going to see that conference through that deal. So you don't have that issue because the short form contracts were already agreed to last summer. I have been told that, it does make a lot of sense to have someone with Tony's background because you do have to get all the way to that long form contracts and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of details. So having someone with a lot of media experience in different companies will help there. But I think the main priority is to handle and transition USC and UCLA into the Big Ten. We still have so many questions about how this is going to look for the two leagues that bring in the most money, that control a lot of power, but they're both going to be 16-team leagues as of next summer. How's that going to work? How is the schedule going to work? How are the logistics going to work? How are all the other sports going to work? And for the Big Ten, obviously, you have so many logistical challenges because now you're going from the Pacific to the Atlantic. So that's a lot to handle and to oversee. It's a lot of, everyone's talked about it's integrating them into the conference. And that's a handful. That's going to take a lot of work. And then I think too, you just have someone who has a background in pro sports and media companies. So everything that's happening off the field, like these jobs they're 80-hour a week jobs. There's so much travel, but like everything that these commissioners touch is business related now. I mean, you obviously have these media deals. You have the legal issues that the leagues are facing, that the NCAA is facing. I can't open my emails one day without going with someone talking about employment status for athletes. And, or is there going to be collective bargaining? Like all of those macro issues, he will probably be handling, right? Because if any of these come to a head here in the next couple of years, these are going to be the leaders who are going to respond to them and lead through them.
That's what I was wondering, because he's been a Major League Baseball executive. How much does that experience play into maybe dealing with something that looks more like what we look at as pro sports now?
I mean, I think that's why you are looking outside of, sitting athletic directors and people working in college sports, right? Is those varied experiences. I'm sure that that's not like the main reason. I would think, the media experiences, the different innovative things he did with MLB Network, for example.
He helped create the BCS back in the day.
He helped create the BCS. He also, I was talking to a lot of folks in baseball, both at MLB Network and who just, kind of work in the baseball space. And a lot of the innovations and changes we've seen to the game were things that he's been pushing for, right? So I do think the idea of getting someone who's creative, who can see a couple steps ahead is really smart. But I do think like what you're describing is exactly part of the reason. If you hire someone who has pro sports experience, well, then they understand how the business of professional sports works. And not that other people don't know how it works, but you've lived it, you've experienced it. So whatever may come down the line, I think you have someone who's experienced with that. And so it's interesting because I really thought that they were going to stay inside of college sports. Like I thought the pendulum was going to swing back. And, you go outsider for one hire, you go back to a college sports insider. And that wasn't the case. But then you talk to people who know Tony and you talk to people around the Big Ten and you understand that it's just, this is the resume, this is the background that they feel the person who is going to be guiding this league through very uncertain times in the collegiate sports landscape should have all of these backgrounds, should have all of these experiences, because you don't know what's going to change with the relationship between an athlete and the school or an athlete in the conference.
We have a question for Miller in the chat. Will the new Big Ten commissioner add Oregon, Washington, and/or Stanford, Cal? It's always going to be a realignment question.
Of course. And this is one of the questions. Like, when you get someone who comes from outside of college sports, we don't know exactly what their stances are in realignment or what they envision, right, for the future of a league. But I will say, like, we did know that what Kevin Warren wanted, right? We knew what he was envisioning, what he was pushing to do. And there wasn't that support through the conference, through the presidents and the schools. There wasn't that support from media partners to help pay for it. So I continue to just come back to the idea that if the Big Ten wanted those schools, they would have just done it in one fell swoop when they added USC UCLA. No one was forcing them to only add 2 schools at that time. So I don't know. I don't, it's really hard. If anyone says anything very definitively about conference realignment, I don't always, I kind of tune it out because you just don't
Except that
know.
one guy in Minnesota who knew everything. That's about the only person I'd trust.
It's one of those things where, like, if someone were to challenge the ACC grant of rights and try to get out of that, then let's talk, right? Because those are schools that the Big Ten and the SEC both covet. But if Oregon and Washington have made it clear that they're interested, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen just because one side wants it to happen. So I just think it's TBD on realignment. I still think that the realignment focus is on the Big 12 and the Pac-12 and those dynamics that we've been covering for a long time. And that's really where it should be. But again, the ACC is the one where they could throw a wrench into the whole thing. That's where it would get interesting.